The alarm clock buzzed at 0445 hours, same as every morning for the past 8 years. Captain Mara Hale rolled out of her narrow base quarters bed, feet hitting the cold linoleum floor with practiced precision. Another day in Building 47. Another day of invisible work that kept Whitmore Air Force Base running smoothly. She dressed in the same pressed uniform, tied her brown hair back in the same regulation bun, and grabbed her thermos of black coffee. The walk to the logistics building took exactly 7 minutes. She timed it countless times, finding comfort in the predictability. Building 47 was a squat, gray structure that housed the administrative heart of the base. While the glamorous hangars and control towers got all the attention, this was where the real work happened. Supply chains, maintenance schedules, pilot rosters, equipment inventories. The thousands of details that meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Mara's cubicle sat in the back corner, deliberately chosen for its anonymity. No windows, no foot traffic, just a desk, computer, and filing cabinets filled with forms that most people never saw. She preferred it that way. The less attention, the better. "Morning, Mara," called Janet Rodriguez from the next cubicle over. Janet was 26, fresh out of training, still excited about military life. She'd been trying to crack Mara's professional shell for months with little success. "Good morning," Mara replied politely, settling into her chair. She powered up her computer and pulled up the day's assignments. 3 aircraft needed maintenance scheduling. 2 supply shipments required coordination, and 14 pilot rotation. Requests waited for processing. The work was methodical, requiring attention to detail but little creativity. Perfect for someone who wanted to disappear. Mara had mastered the art of being competent but unremarkable, efficient enough to avoid scrutiny, invisible enough to be forgotten. Around 0800, the morning briefing began in the conference room. Mara took her usual seat in the back, notepad ready. Carl Barnes, the logistics commander, droned through supply updates and scheduling changes. She copied down relevant information, made appropriate notes, and said nothing. But as Barnes spoke, Mara's attention drifted to the window overlooking the flight line. A formation of F-16s was taxiing for takeoff, their engines creating heat shimmer on the tarmac. Her fingers unconsciously traced the edge of her notepad as she watched them accelerate down the runway, lifting off with practiced grace. For just a moment, muscle memory flickered through her hands. The feel of a stick grip, the slight vibration of an aircraft at altitude, the rush of acceleration during combat maneuvers. She caught herself and forced her attention back to Barnes's presentation. "Hale," Barnes said suddenly. "You're handling the new pilot rotation schedule, correct?" "Yes, sir. Implementation begins Monday." "Good. Make sure there are no conflicts with the training schedule. We can't afford any delays." Mara nodded, making a note she didn't need. She'd already cross-referenced every assignment against the training calendar twice. Details like that were why she'd survived 8 years in this job without making waves. The briefing ended and personnel filed out discussing their various responsibilities. Mara lingered, pretending to organize her notes while the room emptied. Through the window, she could see crew chiefs performing pre-flight checks on another squadron of fighters. The sight stirred something deep in her chest, a familiar ache she'd learned to suppress. Back at her desk, Mara dove into the pilot rotation spreadsheet. Names, ranks, aircraft assignments, duty cycles, all the moving pieces that kept combat operations running. She knew most of these pilots by reputation, had processed their paperwork, tracked their flight hours, managed their careers from the administrative side. Captain Derek Mason, hotshot fresh from Top Gun training, eager to prove himself. Major Lisa Park, veteran of 3 deployments, steady and reliable. Lieutenant Tommy Rodriguez, Janet's older brother, natural. Pilot with good instincts. all of them living the life she'd once known. Her phone rang, interrupting the familiar spiral of regret. Logistics, Captain Hale speaking. Mara, it's Mike Henderson down in maintenance. We've got a problem with the Ghost Hawk prototype. The assigned test pilot called in sick, but the flight eval is scheduled for tomorrow. Can you find us a replacement? Mara's hand tightened on the phone. Ghost Hawk, the new experimental fighter she'd read about in classified briefings. Advanced avionics, superior maneuverability, cutting-edge systems. The kind of aircraft that represented everything she'd lost. I'll check the roster and get back to you, she said evenly. After hanging up, Mara stared at her computer screen for a long moment. The pilot rotation database was open, showing available personnel, but her mind wasn't on scheduling. It was on the technical specifications she'd memorized about Ghost Hawk. The performance data she'd studied late at night when insomnia kept her awake. She shook her head and returned to work. That life was over. She'd made her choice 8 years ago when everything fell apart. Now she was just Captain Mara Hale, logistics officer, keeper of schedules and forms. But late that afternoon, as another formation of jets screamed overhead, Mara allowed herself one brief moment of longing. Her eyes tracked their flight path until they disappeared into the distance, carrying pilots toward adventures she could only remember. The ache in her chest deepened, but she pushed it down like always. Some dreams were meant to stay buried. The Ghost Hawk replacement pilot issue lingered in Mara's mind through the weekend. By Monday morning, she'd identified 3 qualified candidates, but something nagged at her about the whole situation. The prototype program was highly classified. Why was maintenance calling logistics directly instead of going through proper channels? Her question was answered during the weekly staff meeting when Colonel Barnes dropped a bombshell. Effective immediately, all experimental aircraft operations will be coordinated through this office, Barnes announced. That includes scheduling, pilot assignments, and maintenance coordination for the Ghost Hawk program. Major Patricia Whitman, the deputy logistics commander, raised her hand. Sir, shouldn't that fall under flight operations? We don't typically handle combat aircraft assignments. Barnes's expression darkened. Command has decided that logistics will oversee all non-operational flight activities. Questions? The room fell silent, but Mara caught the meaningful glance Barnes shot in her direction. This wasn't about efficiency. This was about control. Someone wanted to keep the experimental program under tight administrative oversight, away from the traditional flight operations chain of command. After the meeting, Mara returned to her desk to find a thick folder marked Classified Ghost Hawk Program waiting for her. Inside were technical specifications, test flight schedules, and pilot evaluation criteria. Her pulse quickened as she read through the performance data. The Ghost Hawk wasn't just an experimental aircraft, it was revolutionary. Stealth capabilities beyond anything currently operational, maneuverability that defied conventional physics, weapon systems that could engage 12 targets simultaneously. This was the future of air combat, and somehow she'd been put in charge of managing it. Heavy reading? Janet's voice made Mara look up. Her cubicle neighbor was holding 2 cups of coffee, offering one with a smile. Just new assignments, Mara replied carefully, accepting the coffee. Thank you. Janet lingered, glancing at the classified folder. Must be important stuff. You've been staring at those papers for 2 hours. Mara closed the folder smoothly. Administrative details. Nothing exciting. But Janet's observant eyes had caught something. You know, Mara, I've worked here for 8 months, and I've never seen you look at paperwork the way you were just looking at that file, like you actually cared about what was inside. The command hit closer to home than Mara expected. She'd built her entire identity around professional detachment, but apparently her mask had slipped. I take all my assignments seriously. I'm sure you do. But this was different. Janet sat on the edge of Mara's desk. "Can I ask you something? What did you do before logistics?" The question hung in the air like a live grenade. Mara had fielded variations of it for years, always with the same vague response about various assignments. But Janet's directness was harder to deflect. "I worked in different areas," Mara said finally. "That's not really an answer, is it?" Janet's voice was gentle but persistent. "Look, I know it's none of my business, but you're not like the other administrative officers. You understand things. They don't. When pilots complain about scheduling conflicts, you fix them in ways that make perfect sense, but nobody else thought of. When maintenance reports equipment issues, you ask questions that show you actually understand the systems." Mara felt exposed, like Janet had peeled back layers of carefully constructed anonymity. "I've been here a long time. You learn things. Maybe. Or maybe you learn things somewhere else first." Janet stood up, preparing to return to her desk. "Either way, I think you're wasting your talents pushing papers." That afternoon, Mara found herself in Hangar C, ostensibly checking on Ghost Hawk maintenance schedules, but really just needing to see the aircraft up close. The prototype sat under bright lights, sleek and predatory, like a shark frozen in motion. "Beautiful machine, isn't she?" Mara turned to find Chief Master Sergeant Frank Morrison, a 30-year veteran who ran the experimental maintenance division. She'd worked with him on scheduling issues, but had never seen him away from his desk. "Impressive specifications," Mara replied neutrally. Morrison studied her face. "You know, I've been watching how you handle the Ghost Hawk paperwork. Most logistics officers treat aircraft like inventory items. You handle the files like you understand what these machines actually do." Another probing comment, another person seeing through her facade. Mara felt like she was walking a tightrope, one wrong step away from exposure. "I try to understand the equipment I'm scheduling," she said. "Fair enough." Morrison walked closer to the Ghost Hawk, running his hand along the wing. "This bird's different from anything we've worked on. The pilot interface is so advanced, it's almost like the aircraft reads your mind. Takes a special kind of aviator to handle that level of integration." Mara found herself studying the cockpit despite her better judgment. The controls were familiar, yet exotic. Traditional flight instruments augmented with holographic displays and neural interface ports. Her hands unconsciously mimicked the control positions, muscle memory surfacing unbidden. "You seem to know your way around a cockpit," Morrison observed quietly. The comment snapped Mara back to reality. She dropped her hands, stepping away from the aircraft. "I should get back to my office. Maintenance schedules won't update themselves." But as she walked away, she felt Morrison's knowing gaze following her. Another crack in her carefully maintained cover. Another person beginning to suspect that the quiet logistics officer might be more than she appeared. That evening, alone in her quarters, Mara pulled out a locked box from under her bed. Inside were medals, commendations, and a single photograph. Her old squadron standing beside their F-16S after a successful mission. Young faces, proud smiles. The confidence that came from knowing you were among the best pilots in the world. She traced the faces with her finger, remembering names and stories. Most had moved on to other assignments, other commands. A few had left the service entirely. One, her wingman during the incident that ended everything, had died in a training accident 3 years ago. Mara closed the box and locked it away again. Some memories were too dangerous to revisit, some identities too painful to remember. She was Captain Mara Hale, logistics officer, invisible administrator. But as she lay in bed, listening to the distant sound of night training flights, Janet's words echoed in her mind. "You're wasting your talents pushing papers." Maybe she was. But safety was more important than fulfillment, and anonymity was safer than recognition. She'd learned that lesson 8 years ago when her world imploded. The problem was, people were starting to notice her again. And in her experience, being noticed never ended well. Tuesday morning brought the first real test of Mara's new position overseeing Ghost Hawk operations. She arrived at her desk to find an urgent message from Colonel Barnes. The test flight scheduled for that afternoon had been moved up to 0900 hours due to changing weather conditions. The problem was immediate and obvious. The replacement pilot she'd assigned was Lieutenant Marcus Cole, and he was currently in the medical bay with food poisoning. With less than 3 hours' notice, she needed to find another qualified pilot from an extremely short list. Mara pulled up the classified roster of pilots cleared for experimental aircraft. Only 7 names appeared, and she quickly eliminated 5 due to scheduling conflicts or medical issues. That left Captain Derek Mason and Major Lisa Park. She tried Mason first, but his squadron was in the middle of a critical training exercise. Park was available, technically, but Mara knew from her personnel files that the Major had a pregnant wife due any day. Hardly the time to volunteer for experimental test flights. Mara stared at her computer screen, feeling the familiar weight of impossible decisions. In her old life, she would have simply taken the flight herself. The Ghost Hawk specifications were burned into her memory, its systems familiar from months of studying technical manuals. She was probably more qualified than anyone on the approved list. But that wasn't her life anymore. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. Logistics. Captain Hale. Mara, it's Colonel Barnes. Please tell me you found a pilot for the Ghost Hawk flight. I'm working on it, sir. The available candidates are limited due to the short notice. Work faster. General Harrison is flying in specifically to observe this test. If we have to cancel, it reflects poorly on the entire logistics division. The implied threat was clear. Mara's position, carefully maintained for 8 years, suddenly felt precarious. Understood, sir. I'll have an answer within the hour. After hanging up, Mara leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes. The smart play was to recommend canceling the flight. Safety protocols existed for good reasons, and rushing to find replacement pilots violated every principle of sound aviation management. The military careers were built on making the impossible happen, and her career, such as it was, depended on solving problems quietly and efficiently. Rough morning? Janet's voice brought Mara back to the present. Scheduling. Conflict. Nothing I can't handle. Janet perched on the edge of Mara's desk again, a habit that was becoming more frequent. The Ghost Hawk flight? I heard about the pilot situation through the grapevine. Mara looked up sharply. That's classified information. Relax, I'm not asking for details. But I do know you're under pressure to find a replacement pilot, and I know the approved list is very short. Janet paused, studying Mara's face. I also know you've been studying those technical manuals, like your life depends on understanding every detail. It's my job to understand the equipment I schedule. Is it? Because most logistics officers don't memorize weapon specifications and flight performance data. Janet's voice dropped lower. Most logistics officers don't instinctively know which pilots are best suited for specific missions. Most logistics officers don't look at experimental aircraft like they're seeing old friends. Mara felt the walls closing in. Janet was too observant, asking too many questions, getting too close to truths that needed to stay buried. I don't know what you're implying, Mara said carefully. I'm not implying anything. I'm stating it directly. Janet leaned closer. You're not really a logistics officer, are you? At least, you weren't always one. The accusation hung between them like a challenge. Mara had 2 choices: maintain her cover with a convincing denial, or trust someone for the first time in 8 years. Before she could respond, her phone rang. Again. Logistics, Captain Hale. Mara, it's Frank Morrison in maintenance. I just heard about the pilot situation. Listen, I've got a suggestion, but you're not going to like it. I'm listening. What if we postpone the flight? I know General Harrison is coming, but safety has to be the priority. We can't risk an experimental aircraft with an unprepared pilot. It was the smart recommendation, the safe choice, the decision that protected everyone involved. Mara opened her mouth to agree, then caught Janet's knowing look. Chief Morrison, what would it take to get someone up to speed on the Ghost Hawk systems in 3 hours? Honestly, it would take someone who already understands advanced avionics, preferably with combat experience. The neural interface is intuitive for experienced pilots, but overwhelming for rookies. We'd need someone with the right background. What kind of background? Air-to-air combat experience, preferably in multiple aircraft types. Advanced training in electronic warfare systems. Demonstrated ability to adapt quickly to new platforms. Morrison paused. Basically, we'd need someone like the old Vapor. Mara's blood turned to ice. Vapor, her old call sign, her old identity, her old life. The name that had once struck fear into enemy pilots and inspired confidence in allies. Vapor? She managed to say, before your time, probably. Legendary pilot from the early 2000s. Disappeared after some kind of incident. Classified stuff. But she was exactly the kind of aviator who could handle the Ghost Hawk on short notice. Janet was staring at Mara intently, pieces clicking together in her sharp mind. Mara felt exposed, vulnerable, like standing naked in the middle of the flight line. Ill. I'll see what I can do about finding a pilot, Mara said, ending the call. Vapor, Janet said quietly. That's an interesting call sign. Mara said nothing, but her silence was answer enough. You know what I think? Janet continued. I think you're exactly the kind of pilot Chief Morrison was describing. I think you've been hiding in plain sight for 8 years, pushing papers, and managing schedules when you should be flying. The truth was out, or at least part of it. Mara felt like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, one step away from falling back into a life she'd tried to leave behind. Even if that were true, Mara said slowly, it wouldn't matter. I'm not qualified for experimental aircraft. Are you sure about that? Janet pulled out her phone, accessing base personnel records. Because according to the system captain, Mara Hale has current flight status and valid clearances for classified operations. Mara's heart stopped. She'd assumed her flight credentials had been revoked years ago, another casualty of her fall from grace. But military bureaucracy was notoriously slow, and apparently some paperwork had been overlooked. That's impossible, she whispered. Is it? Or did someone make sure you stayed qualified, just in case? Janet's expression was serious now. Mara, I don't know what happened to you, but I can see it eating you alive. You're wasting away in this cubicle when you could be doing something that matters. The weight of 8 years of suppressed identity crashed down on Mara all at once. She was Vapor, the pilot who'd saved hundreds of lives, who'd faced impossible odds and won, who'd been betrayed by politics and buried by bureaucracy. But she was also Captain Mara Hale, quiet administrator, keeper of secrets, guardian of her own safety. The choice was coming whether she wanted it or not. In less than 2 hours, she would have to decide who she really was. The call came at 0830 hours, 30 minutes before the scheduled Ghost Hawk test flight. Mara was still staring at her computer screen, paralyzed by the impossible choice between safety and duty, when her phone rang with an emergency tone. Captain Hale, this is the command center. We have a developing situation. Radar has detected multiple aircraft approaching. From the northwest, speed and altitude consistent with military fighters. They're not responding to radio calls and have violated restricted airspace. Mara's blood chilled. How many aircraft? 12 confirmed contacts, sir. They're maintaining attack formation and jamming our communications. Base commander has declared DEFCON 2. All personnel are to report to emergency stations. The line went dead. Around her, alarms began blaring as the base shifted into combat readiness. Red lights flashed, and the PA system crackled to life. All personnel, this is not a drill. Report to emergency stations immediately. Mara stood frozen as chaos erupted around her. Janet was at her elbow, face pale with fear. 12 aircraft? Who would attack us here? But Mara's mind was already analyzing the tactical situation. 12 fighters in attack formation, jamming communications, approaching from the northwest. It was a professional military assault, not terrorists or criminals. Someone with advanced aircraft and experienced pilots had decided to strike at Whitmore Air Force Base. She grabbed her security badge and ran toward the command center. Janet closed behind. The corridors were filled with personnel moving to emergency positions, but something was wrong. Too many key people were missing: pilots, crew chiefs, senior officers. In the command center, chaos reigned. Colonel Barnes was shouting into multiple phones while radar operators tracked the incoming threats. The central display showed 12 red contacts closing on the base at high speed. "Where are our fighters?" Barnes demanded. "Sir, most of Alpha Squadron is at Nellis for training exercises," responded Major Whitman. "Bravo Squadron is grounded for maintenance. We have 3 operational aircraft, but only 2 qualified pilots on base. 2 pilots against 12 attackers." Mara felt the familiar surge of tactical awareness, her mind automatically calculating odds, assessing options, planning responses. The old vapor was stirring, 8 years of suppressed instincts awakening. "Sir," called out the radar operator, "the contacts have separated into 3 groups. 2 groups of 4 are flanking our position while the main group of 4 is coming straight in." Classic pincer movement. Mara stepped closer to the display, studying the attack pattern. It was textbook, professional, exactly what she would have done in their position. These weren't amateurs. They were experienced combat pilots executing a coordinated assault. "ETA to weapons range?" Barnes asked. 8 minutes, sir." Barnes grabbed his radio. "All available pilots to the flight line immediately. We need everything in the air now." But Mara knew the math. 2 fighters against 12 attackers meant certain defeat. The base's defenses would be overwhelmed, personnel would be killed, aircraft would be destroyed. Unless... She looked at the command display again, noting details others had missed. The attack formation was perfect for engaging conventional fighters, but it had weaknesses. The lead group was slightly ahead of the flanking elements, creating a gap that an experienced pilot could exploit. The jammers were focused on communication frequencies, leaving navigation and targeting systems partially clear. Most importantly, the attackers weren't expecting significant resistance. They'd planned for a quick strike against a lightly defended target, not a fight. "Captain Hale." Barnes spotted her in the crowd. "What are you doing here? Logistics personnel should be in the bunkers." "Sir, request permission to assist with aircraft coordination." "We don't need schedules right now, Captain. We need fighters." In the air, Mara took a deep breath, crossing a line she'd avoided for 8 years. "Sir, I'm qualified for combat operations." Barnes stared at her like she'd spoken in a foreign language. "You're a logistics officer." "Check my record, sir. Flight status current, clearances valid, combat experience extensive." Major Whitman was already pulling up Mara's personnel file on her tablet. Her eyes widened as she read. "Sir, Captain Hale has current Type 1 flight status and is cleared for all classified aircraft operations. Combat experience includes..." "My God, she's got over 200 missions." "That's impossible," Barnes said. "She's been pushing papers for 8 years." "Sir, Mara said quietly. "My previous assignments are classified. But I'm qualified to fly the Ghost Hawk, and right now you need every pilot you can get." The command center fell silent, except for the steady beeping of radar contacts. Everyone was staring at the quiet logistics officer who just claimed she could fly experimental fighters into combat. Barnes studied her face, seeing something he'd missed for years. "What's your call sign, Captain?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Mara felt 8 years of careful anonymity crumbling, but with 12 enemy fighters bearing down on the base, hiding was no longer an option. "Vapor, sir." The reaction was immediate. Morrison, who'd arrived from maintenance, sucked in a sharp breath. Several of the younger officers looked confused, but the veterans recognized the name. "Jesus Christ," whispered Major Whitman. "Vapor, you're the pilot from Desert Storm, the one who disappeared," Barnes finished. "Captain, if you're who you claim to be, why have you been hiding in logistics?" "That's classified, sir. But right now, those details don't matter. What matters is getting aircraft in the air before those 12 fighters reach weapons range." Barnes looked at the tactical display, then back at Mara. The base commander was faced with an impossible choice. Trust the word of a logistics officer who claimed to be a legendary pilot, or watch his base get destroyed by overwhelming odds. "Morrison," Barnes called out. "Is the Ghost Hawk ready for combat operations?" "Yes, sir." "Fully armed and fueled, systems optimal. Time to target?" 5 minutes, sir." Barnes made his decision. "Captain Hale, you're cleared for immediate takeoff. God help us all if you're not who you say you are." Mara nodded once, feeling the weight of 8 years lifting from her shoulders. "Sir, I'll need clearance for unlimited maneuvers and weapons." "Free authorization?" "You've got it. Now go." As Mara turned to leave, Janet grabbed her arm. "Mara, wait. You don't have to do this. You could stay here, stay safe." For a moment, Mara saw her reflection in Janet's frightened eyes. The quiet administrator who'd found peace in anonymity, who'd built a life around avoiding exactly this kind of situation. Then she looked at the tactical display, at 12 red contacts carrying death toward her base, toward her people, toward everything she'd spent 8 years protecting from the shadows. "Yes," she said quietly, "I do." She ran toward Hangar C, toward the Ghost Hawk, toward a confrontation that would prove whether 8 years of hiding had dulled her skills or simply stored them like a compressed spring, waiting for the moment when Vapor could finally return to the sky. Behind her, the radar operator's voice cut through the command center noise. 4 minutes to weapons range. All contacts maintaining attack formation. The clock was running. The enemy was coming. And for the first time in 8 years, Captain Mara Hale was going to do what she was born to do. Mara sprinted across the tarmac as alarms wailed overhead. 3 minutes until the enemy fighters reached weapons range, barely enough time to reach the Ghost Hawk, let alone get airborne, and into position for engagement. Every second counted now. Hangar C was in chaos. Ground crews scrambled to prepare the 2 conventional fighters, while Morrison stood beside the Ghost Hawk, headset in hand. He spotted Mara approaching, and his weathered face showed a mixture of relief and concern. "Vapor," he called out, using her call sign for the first time in 8 years. "Bird's ready, but are you sure about this? It's been a long time since you flew combat." "Like riding a bicycle, Chief," Mara replied, grabbing a flight suit from the equipment locker. But even as she spoke, she felt the familiar pre-combat jitters, the heightened awareness, the slight tremor in her hands, the crystalline focus that separated great pilots from dead ones. The flight suit fit perfectly, muscle memory guiding her through the gear check. Helmet, gloves, survival pack, emergency beacon. Each item clicked into place as if she'd done it yesterday instead of 8 years ago. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, but her mind was racing through tactical calculations. 12 enemy fighters in a pincer formation. 2 friendly aircraft already launching. She could hear their engines spooling up outside the hangar. That made it 3 against 12. Still overwhelming odds, but manageable for someone with the right skills and the right aircraft. The Ghost Hawk sat under the bright lights like a sleeping predator. Its angular surfaces absorbed light rather than reflecting it, giving the aircraft an otherworldly appearance. Mara approached the cockpit ladder, then paused. 8 years. 8 years of silence, of hiding, of pretending to be someone she wasn't. Part of her wondered if she could still do this, if the skills that had once made her legendary were still there or had atrophied from disuse. Morrison appeared at her shoulder. Having second thoughts? No, Mara said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. Just remembering why I stopped flying in the first place. Politics? Politics? She confirmed. But those 12 aircraft out there aren't interested in politics. They're here to destroy this base, and right now I'm the only thing standing in their way. She climbed into the cockpit and immediately felt like she was coming home. The seat. Molded to her body, the controls fell naturally under her hands, and the advanced neural interface hummed to life as it recognized her biopatterns. The Ghost Hawk systems were far more sophisticated than anything she'd flown before, but the fundamental principles were the same. Ghost Hawk 1, this is Tower, crackled through her headset. You are cleared for immediate emergency takeoff. Runway 27 is clear. Tower, Ghost Hawk 1 ready for departure, Mara replied, then switched to internal communications. Chief Morrison, final systems check. All green vapor, weapons loaded, countermeasures active, stealth systems online. Birds ready to hunt. Mara began the startup sequence, her hands moving across the controls with increasing confidence. Engines spooled up with a different sound than conventional fighters, quieter, more efficient, but with an underlying power that promised incredible performance. Through her canopy, she could see the 2 conventional fighters taxiing toward the runway. Captain Mason and Major Park, both excellent pilots but flying older aircraft against superior numbers. They'd need every advantage she could give them. Tower, Ghost Hawk 1 requesting tactical briefing. To Ghost Hawk 1, enemy aircraft are 3 minutes out, approaching from multiple vectors. You are cleared to engage with all available weapons. Good hunting. The runway stretched ahead, familiar and welcoming. Mara pushed the throttles forward and felt the Ghost Hawk surge forward with breathtaking acceleration. The aircraft seemed eager to fly, responding to her inputs with precision that bordered on telepathic. Wheels left the ground, and suddenly she was airborne again after 8 years on the ground. The sensation was indescribable. Freedom, power, and purpose all merged into a single moment of pure exhilaration. The quiet logistics officer was gone, replaced by something far more dangerous. A Ghost Hawk 1 airborne, she reported, banking toward the northwest where radar had last detected the incoming threats. Climbing to Angels 20, requesting target update. Ghost Hawk 1, we're tracking 12 contacts in 3 groups. Lead group bearing 310, range 15 miles. Flanking groups at 330 and 290, similar ranges. Mara studied her tactical display as the Ghost Hawk climbed toward 20,000 feet. The enemy formation was textbook. Perfect, exactly what she'd expect from professional military pilots. But perfection had its own vulnerabilities, predictability being the greatest weakness of any textbook maneuver. Ghost Hawk 1, this is Falcon Leader, came a voice she recognized as Captain Mason. We're in position to engage the Southern Group. What's your tactical assessment? For a moment, Mara hesitated. She'd spent 8 years avoiding leadership, avoiding decisions that could affect other people's lives. But Mason was asking for guidance, and lives depended on getting the Tactics right. Falcon Leader, recommend you and Falcon 2 engage the northern group first. I'll take the lead element head-on, trying to break up their formation. Once they scatter, we can pick them off individually. Copy that, Ghost Hawk 1. You taking 4 aircraft solo? Affirmative. Ghost Hawk has capabilities your aircraft don't. Trust me on this. As the words left her mouth, Mara realized she was thinking like Vapor again. Calculating impossible odds, planning aggressive maneuvers, trusting in her skills and her aircraft to overcome superior numbers. The old confidence was returning, 8 years of doubt and caution evaporating in the face of immediate danger. Her radar showed the first group of enemy fighters 20 miles out and closing fast. 4 aircraft in diamond formation, probably, carrying advanced air-to-air missiles with engagement ranges longer than anything the conventional fighters could match. But the Ghost Hawk wasn't conventional. Its stealth capabilities meant she could get much closer before being detected, and its advanced weapon systems could engage multiple targets simultaneously. If she played this right, she could eliminate the lead group before they even knew she was there. Ghost Hawk 1, first group is 15 miles out and closing. Do you have contact? Negative, Tower. Ghost Hawk is running silent approach. Mara checked her stealth systems, all green, radar signature minimal. To the enemy fighters, she would appear as little more than atmospheric disturbance until she was close enough to make her first shot count. 10 miles. Her hands found that weapon selection controls, muscle memory guiding her through the arming sequence. The Ghost Hawk carried a mix of conventional missiles and experimental weapons, all designed for maximum lethality against modern fighter aircraft. 5 miles. Still no indication that the enemy had detected her approach. They were maintaining their tight formation, probably confident that their superior numbers would overwhelm any resistance. 2 miles. Mara selected her first target. The lead aircraft, probably the flight commander. Take out the leader, disrupt the formation, create chaos that could be exploited. Fox 2, she called out, launching her first missile. The weapon streaked away toward the lead aircraft, its guidance system locked onto the target's heat signature. The explosion lit up the morning sky as the enemy leader disintegrated in a ball of fire and debris. The remaining 3 fighters scattered immediately, their tight formation dissolving into individual survival maneuvers. Exactly what Mara had hoped for. Ghost Hawk 1. Splash 1 Bandit, she reported, already maneuvering for her next engagement. The Ghost Hawk responded to her inputs like an extension of her will, rolling and climbing with impossible grace. The second enemy fighter was turning hard left, trying to get behind her for a missile shot. But Mara had anticipated the move, banking right and diving toward the deck where the Ghost Hawk's superior maneuverability would give her the advantage. Unknown aircraft, you are in violation of restricted airspace, came a transmission on the emergency frequency. Identify yourself immediately or we will engage. Mara almost laughed. After opening fire with missiles, they were demanding identification? Either these pilots were following strict rules of engagement, or they were stalling while positioning for a coordinated attack. She chose to assume the latter. Banking hard right, Mara came up behind the second fighter and fired her cannon. The 20mm rounds stitched across the enemy aircraft's wing and fuselage, sending it spinning toward the ground in a trail of smoke and flame. Splash 2, she reported, already scanning for the remaining aircraft from the lead group. Ghost Hawk 1, this is Falcon Leader. We're engaging the northern group now. They've got longer range missiles than we expected. Could use some help over here. Mara checked her tactical display. The 2 Falcon fighters were outnumbered 4-2 and facing aircraft with superior weapons. If she didn't intervene quickly, Mason and Park would be overwhelmed. But she still had 2 aircraft from the lead group to deal with, and the southern group of 4 fighters was approaching the base from another vector. Too many threats, not enough time. This was the moment that separated good pilots from legendary ones, the ability to think 3 moves ahead while fighting for your life in 3 dimensions. Falcon leader, maintain defensive posture. I'm coming to assist. Mara banked toward the northern group, pushing the Ghost Hawk to its performance limits. The aircraft responded beautifully, accelerating past Mach 2 as she climbed toward the engagement zone. Behind her, the 2 remaining aircraft from the lead group were in pursuit, but they were flying older fighters that couldn't match the Ghost Hawk's speed or stealth capabilities. She'd deal with them after helping the Falcons. Ghost Hawk 1. We've got missiles in the air. Mason's voice was tight with stress. 4 birds incoming. We're defensive. Mara could see the engagement on her display. 2 friendly aircraft maneuvering desperately while enemy missiles tracked toward them. The Falcons were good pilots, but they were outgunned and outnumbered. She armed her most advanced weapon, an experimental missile designed to engage multiple targets simultaneously. The system locked onto 3 of the incoming enemy missiles, tracking their flight paths and calculating intercept courses. Falcon leader, continue evasive maneuvers. Ghost Hawk engaging missiles. She fired and watched 3 of her weapons streak toward the incoming threats. The technology was incredible, each missile adjusting its course in real time to intercept the enemy weapons. 3 explosions bloomed in the sky as her missiles found their targets. The 4th enemy missile continued toward Falcon 2, Major Park's aircraft. Mara watched in horror as Park tried to evade, her fighter twisting through the sky in increasingly desperate maneuvers. Falcon 2, missile still tracking. Brake left, deploy chaff. But the enemy weapon was too close. Too fast. Mara watched helplessly as it closed the final distance toward Park's aircraft. At the last possible second, Park ejected. Her seat rocketed clear of the fighter just as the missile struck, turning the aircraft into an expanding fireball. Mara saw the parachute deploy and breathed a sigh of relief. Park would live, even if her aircraft was destroyed. Falcon 2 is down, but pilot ejected safely, Mara reported. Falcon leader, you're on your own up there. I'm engaging the northern group. Copy that, Ghost Hawk 1. Give them hell. Mara rolled the Ghost Hawk into a steep dive, approaching the northern group from above and behind. 4 enemy fighters were repositioning after their missile attack, probably preparing for another engagement with the remaining Falcon aircraft. They never saw her coming. Her first missile took out the trailing aircraft before its pilot even knew he was under attack. The second missile damaged another fighter, sending it limping away from the engagement zone. The remaining 2 fighters split apart, one heading toward the base while the other turned to engage her directly. This is getting personal now, Mara muttered, selecting her cannon and maneuvering for a close-range engagement. The enemy pilot was good, very good. His aircraft twisted and turned through the sky in maneuvers that pushed the limits of both machine and pilot. But Mara had 8 years of suppressed instincts guiding her, and the Ghost Hawk had capabilities that no conventional fighter could match. The dogfight lasted less than 2 minutes. When it ended, another enemy aircraft was falling toward the Earth in pieces while Mara climbed back toward altitude. Ghost Hawk 1. This is Tower. Outstanding work up there. Current count shows 5 enemy aircraft destroyed, 2 damaged and withdrawing. The southern group appears to be breaking off their attack. Mara checked her tactical display. The remaining enemy aircraft were indeed withdrawing, apparently deciding that the cost of continuing the attack was too high. The base was safe. The immediate threat was over. But as the adrenaline began to fade, Mara realized that everything had changed. She was no longer the quiet logistics officer who hid in Building 47. She was Vapor again, the pilot who just single-handedly broken up a coordinated attack by superior numbers. There would be no going back to anonymity now. Too many people had seen what she could do. Too many questions would be asked. The carefully constructed life she'd built over 8 years was about to crumble. Ghost Hawk 1, you're cleared to return to base. And Vapor? The tower controller's voice carried a note of awe. Welcome back. As Mara banked toward home, she caught sight of her reflection in the canopy glass. For the first time in 8 years, she recognized the person looking back at her. The warrior had returned. The Ghost Hawk touched down on runway 27 to a crowd unlike anything Mara had seen in her 8 years at Whitmore. Ground crews, pilots, administrative staff, and senior officers had gathered on the flight line, all waiting to see the pilot who'd just accomplished the impossible. As she taxied toward the hangar, Mara could see Colonel Barnes standing with General Harrison, the visiting commander whose inspection had started this whole crisis. Both men looked stunned, as if they couldn't quite believe what they'd witnessed. She shut down the engines and sat in the cockpit for a moment, gathering herself. The Ghost Hawk systems powered down around her with soft electronic chirps, but the silence felt deafening after the chaos of aerial combat. In less than an hour, she destroyed 5 enemy aircraft and saved the base from a coordinated attack. She'd also destroyed 8 years of carefully maintained anonymity. The canopy raised with a hydraulic whine, and suddenly she was surrounded by noise and activity. Ground crews swarmed the aircraft, checking for damage and beginning post-flight procedures. But all eyes were on Mara as she unstrapped and climbed down from the cockpit. Captain Hale. General Harrison approached first, his expression unreadable. That was the most impressive display of combat flying I've seen in 30 years of service. Thank you, sir, Mara replied, removing her helmet. Her hair fell loose around her shoulders, and she realized how different she must look from the quiet administrator who'd started the day in Building 47. 5 kills against 12 attackers. Harrison continued. In experimental aircraft you'd never flown before. Either you're the luckiest pilot alive, or you're considerably more experienced than your personnel file suggests. Behind Harrison, she could see familiar faces in the crowd. Janet stood near the hangar entrance, her expression mixing pride and concern. Morrison was grinning broadly, clearly vindicated in his assessment of her abilities. Other personnel she'd worked with for years stared at her like they were seeing a ghost. Which, in a way, they were. Sir, I'm qualified for all assigned duties. Mara said carefully. I'm sure you are. But I think it's time we had a conversation about exactly what those qualifications include. Harrison gestured toward the base headquarters. Colonel Barnes, I want Captain Hale in my office in 30 minutes. Full debrief, complete personnel review, and I want answers to some very specific questions. As the crowd began to disperse, Mara found herself walking back toward the headquarters building with a strange mixture of relief and dread. The secret was out. There was no hiding anymore. But she wasn't sure she was ready for the scrutiny that was coming. Janet caught up with her outside Building 47. Mara, that was incredible. I mean, I knew you were more than you seemed, but that ... to quote, she shook her head in amazement. 5 aircraft? Against those odds? I got lucky, Mara said automatically. Luck had nothing to do with it, and you know it. Janet's voice was serious now. You flew like someone who'd been doing it her whole life. You made tactical decisions that saved lives. You were magnificent up there. The praise made Mara uncomfortable. She'd spent 8 years avoiding recognition, avoiding attention, avoiding exactly this kind of conversation. Janet, I need to get ready for the debrief. General Harrison is going to want answers I'm not sure I can give. Then maybe it's time to stop hiding, Janet said gently. Whatever happened 8 years ago, whatever made you disappear into logistics, it's over now. You can't pretend to be someone you're not anymore. Mara stopped walking and looked at her friend. What if who I really am is someone I don't want to be? What if who you really are is someone the world needs? 30 minutes later, Mara sat in General Harrison's temporary office, facing a panel that included Harrison, Colonel Barnes, and Major General Patricia Reeves, the wing commander who'd arrived during the crisis. The room felt like a tribunal, with 3 senior officers studying her like a specimen under a microscope. "Captain Hale," Harrison began, "let's start with the basics. Your personnel file shows 8 years of exemplary service in logistics, with no prior flight assignments. Yet today, you flew an experimental fighter aircraft with the skill of a veteran combat pilot. Care to explain this discrepancy?" Mara had prepared for this moment, but sitting here under their collective gaze, she felt exposed and vulnerable. "Sir, my previous assignments are classified. I have sufficient clearance for any classification level," Harrison replied, "and I've already made some preliminary inquiries. Your service record prior to Whitmore Air Force Base is heavily redacted, with most details sealed under national security protocols." General Reeves leaned forward. "Captain, we're not here to compromise operational security, but we need to understand who you are and why you've been hiding among our administrative staff." Barnes spoke up. "Sir, with respect, does it matter? She saved the base today. 5 confirmed kills, no friendly casualties, mission accomplished." "It matters," Harrison said firmly, "because I don't like mysteries in my command structure, and because someone with Captain Hale's obvious capabilities has been wasting away in a logistics cubicle for 8 years. That suggests either gross mismanagement of personnel, or there's a story we need to understand." Mara realized she was at a crossroads. She could maintain her cover, claim the classification excuse, and hope they'd let it drop. Or she could tell the truth and face whatever consequences came with it. She chose the truth. "Sir, my name is Captain Mara Hale, call sign Vapor. I served as a combat pilot from 1995 to 2017, with deployments in Desert Storm, Bosnia, Afghanistan, and Iraq. Total combat missions, 237. Air-to-air kills, 42 confirmed." The silence in the room was complete. Even Harrison, who'd expected something significant, looked stunned by the numbers. "Vapor," General Reeves whispered. "You're the pilot from the Pristina incident." Mara nodded slowly. The Pristina incident, the mission that had ended her flying career and started her 8-year exile in administrative purgatory. "What happened?" Harrison asked quietly. Mara took a deep breath, preparing to revisit the worst day of her life. March 15, 2017. I was leading a 4-ship flight over Kosovo routine patrol mission. We intercepted unidentified aircraft that turned out to be Serbian fighters testing NATO response times. Rules of engagement were ambiguous. They weren't actively hostile, but they were violating airspace. She paused, remembering the weight of split-second decisions made at 30,000 feet. I made the call to intercept and escort them. Out. No shots fired. No international incident. Mission accomplished. But the Serbian government complained through diplomatic channels, claiming we'd acted aggressively. Politics got involved. Questions were asked about my judgment, my decision-making process, my adherence to rules of engagement. "That sounds like exactly what a flight leader should have done," Barnes said. The review board agreed. I was cleared of any wrongdoing. But the incident had generated publicity, congressional questions, diplomatic tensions. The Air Force needed someone to blame, and I was convenient. Mara's voice hardened with old anger. They couldn't court-martial me because I'd followed orders. They couldn't discharge me because my record was spotless. So they transferred me to administrative duties and buried me where I couldn't cause any more diplomatic embarrassments. Harrison studied her face. "And you accepted that?" I was. Tired of fighting, sir. Tired of politics. Tired of having my every decision second-guessed by people who'd never been in combat. Logistics seemed like a place where I could serve quietly and avoid the spotlight. For 8 years, General Reeves said. You've been hiding for 8 years. Yes, ma'am. What a waste, Harrison said, shaking his head. Captain, do you have any idea how many pilots with your experience and skills the Air Force has been desperately short of? How many missions could have used someone with your capabilities? I served where I was assigned, sir. You served where you were hidden, Harrison corrected. There's a difference. He looked at the other officers. Gentlemen, I think we've heard enough. Captain Hale, you're hereby transferred to active flight status, effective immediately. Mara felt the world shift around her. Sir, you've proven today that 8 years of paperwork haven't dulled your skills. The Air Force needs pilots like you, especially with experimental programs like the Ghost Hawk entering operational testing. Harrison smiled slightly. Consider this your official return to the profession you never should have left. Sir, I'm not sure I want to return to flight status. The statement hung in the air like a challenge. Harrison's expression hardened. Captain, that wasn't a request. It was an order. You're too valuable an asset to waste in logistics, and today's action has made it impossible to maintain you. Anonymity anyway. Mara realized he was right. The quiet administrator was gone forever, destroyed by 30 minutes of aerial combat and 5 enemy kills. There was no going back to Building 47, no returning to the safe anonymity she'd built. Over 8 years. She was vapor again, whether she wanted to be or not. Understood, sir, she said finally. Good. Report to flight operations tomorrow morning. You'll be leading the Ghost Hawk test program. Harrison stood, signaling the end of the meeting. And Captain? Thank you for reminding us why we need pilots like you. As Mara left the office, she felt like she was walking into a new life, or perhaps returning to an old one she'd never really left. The warrior was back, the administrator was gone, and there was no telling what came next. But for the first time in 8 years, she was curious to find out. 3 days after the attack, Mara reported to flight operations at 0600 hours, wearing a flight suit instead of her administrative uniform for the first time in 8 years. The building buzzed with activity as pilots prepared for morning missions, but conversation stopped when she entered. Word had spread quickly through the pilot community. Vapor was back. Captain Derek Mason approached first, still slightly stunned by recent events. Ma'am, I wanted to thank you for what you did up there. Without your intervention, we wouldn't have survived that engagement. You did well, Captain. Both you and Major Park showed excellent tactical awareness under pressure. Permission to speak freely, ma'am? Mara nodded. Why didn't you tell us? 8 years you've been scheduling our flights, managing our rosters, and we never knew we were working with a legend. It was a fair question, one she'd been asking herself since Harrison's order. Because legends are usually dead, Captain. I prefer being alive and anonymous. But as she spoke the words, Mara realized they were no longer true. The anonymous life was over, and she was slowly discovering that she didn't miss it as much as she'd expected. Her new office was in the same building as flight operations, with windows overlooking the flight line instead of a cubicle in Building 47. The desk held technical manuals on the Ghost Hawk program, mission planning software, and operational reports instead of logistics schedules. At 0800, she was called to the weekly pilot's briefing, not to take notes in the back row, but to sit at the front table with the other senior officers. The change in perspective was disorienting after 8 years of invisibility. Ladies and gentlemen, announced Colonel Barnes, I want to introduce our new Ghost Hawk program commander, Captain Mara Hale. Most of you know her as the logistics officer who's been scheduling your missions for the past 8 years. What you didn't knows that she's also the pilot who saved this base 3 days ago. The reaction was immediate. Applause, whistles, and more than a few expressions of amazement. Mara stood awkwardly, unused to being the center of attention. "Thank you," she said when the noise died down. "I look forward to working with all of you in a new capacity. The Ghost Hawk program represents the future of air combat, and I intend to make sure we develop tactics and procedures that will keep our pilots alive and our missions successful." After the briefing, Mara was approached by Major General Patricia Reeves, who'd remained on base to oversee the investigation into the attack. "Captain, walk with me," Reeves said, leading Mara outside toward the flight line. "I'd been reviewing the incident reports from the attack, and I have some concerns I'd like to discuss." They stopped near Hangar C, where the Ghost Hawk sat under guard. The experimental aircraft looked peaceful in the morning light, giving no indication of its lethal capabilities. "The attack was too well coordinated to be random," Reeves continued. 12 aircraft, professional formation flying, advanced electronic warfare capabilities. Someone with significant resources and military training planned this operation. Mara had reached the same conclusion, but hadn't expected senior command to be so direct about it. "Do we know who was responsible?" "Intelligence is still analyzing the wreckage, but preliminary assessment suggests the aircraft were modified civilian fighters with military-grade weapons and avionics. That narrows the list of potential operators considerably. A foreign government? Possibly. Or a well-funded terrorist organization. Or," Reeves paused, studying Mara's face, "a defense contractor with a vested interest in seeing the Ghost Hawk program fail." The implication hit Mara like a physical blow. "You think this was industrial sabotage?" "I think someone wanted to test our defenses and capabilities. They sent 12 aircraft expecting to overwhelm our response, document our defensive measures, and potentially capture or destroy the Ghost Hawk prototype." Reeves smiled grimly. "What they didn't expect was you." As they spoke, a black sedan pulled up near the hangar. 2 men in expensive suits got out, followed by a woman in Air Force dress uniform, whom Mara didn't recognize. "And speaking of unexpected developments," Reeves muttered, "here comes the Pentagon." The woman approached them with the confident stride of someone accustomed to command. Her uniform showed the stars of a brigadier general, and her expression suggested she was not happy to be at Whitmore. "General Reeves," she said curtly. "I'm General Amanda Cross, Air Force Special Operations. I'm here about the Ghost Hawk incident and Captain Hale's unauthorized flight." Mara felt her stomach drop. This was what she'd been afraid of, the inevitable review. The questions about her actions, the possibility that politics would once again destroy her career. "General Cross," Reeves replied smoothly, "I'm not aware of any unauthorized flights. Captain Hale was cleared for emergency combat operations by Base Command during a direct attack on this facility. Captain Hale is a logistics officer with no recent flight training or combat certification," Cross responded. "Her operation of an experimental aircraft worth $200 million violated multiple protocols and regulations. Her operation of that aircraft saved this base and prevented the loss of multiple aircraft and personnel." Reeves shot back. "I'd say that trumps protocols." Cross turned to Mara, her expression cold and evaluating. "Captain Hale, you've caused considerable disruption in Washington. Questions are being asked about how a logistics officer obtained clearance for classified aircraft, why your background wasn't properly vetted, and whether your actions constitute gross insubordination." Mara recognized the tone. It was the same bureaucratic hostility she'd faced 8 years ago after the Pristina incident. The same people who cared more about procedures than results, more about politics than protecting American lives. "General Cross," Mara said carefully, "I acted under emergency authority to defend this base against hostile aircraft. My actions were within my authorized responsibilities as a qualified military pilot. Qualified according to whom? Your flight status should have been revoked years ago. Your presence in a combat aircraft represents a failure of command oversight and personnel management. General, interrupted a new voice, I think you're missing the point. Everyone turned to see General Harrison approaching from the direction of base headquarters. His expression was thunderous, and Mara could tell he'd heard enough of the conversation to be thoroughly annoyed. General Cross, Harrison continued, Captain Hale's actions 3 days ago prevented what could have been a catastrophic loss of personnel and equipment. She engaged 12 hostile aircraft with obsolete weapons and destroyed 5 of them without suffering any friendly casualties. That's not insubordination. That's exactly what we train our pilots to do. Cross's expression didn't change. General, Harrison, I understand your desire to defend your personnel. But Captain Hale's background raises serious questions about security protocols and command oversight. The Ghost Hawk program is too important to risk on unauthorized personnel. Unauthorized personnel? Harrison's voice rose dangerously. Captain Hale has more combat experience than any pilot currently in the program. Her security clearances are valid, her qualifications are current, and her performance 3 days ago was flawless. Her performance was lucky, Cross snapped. And luck isn't a qualification for experimental aircraft operations. That was the moment Mara realized she was tired of defending herself to bureaucrats who'd never been in combat, never made life-or-death decisions at 30,000 feet, never understood the difference between protocol and survival. General Cross, she said quietly, with respect, luck had nothing to do with it. Cross turned back to her, eyebrows raised at the interruption. I engaged 12 aircraft because they posed a direct threat to this base and the personnel on it. I used my training, my experience, and my aircraft's capabilities to neutralize that threat as efficiently as possible. If you consider that insubordination, then I submit that your definition of military duty is fundamentally flawed. The silence stretched uncomfortably as Cross stared at Mara with obvious displeasure. Captain, your attitude confirms my assessment, that you're unsuitable for continued military service. I'm recommending immediate review of your status and possible disciplinary action. On what grounds? Harrison demanded. Insubordination, violation of aircraft protocols, unauthorized use of classified equipment, and failure to follow proper chain of command during emergency operations. Mara felt the familiar weight of bureaucratic persecution, the same political machinery that had destroyed her career 8 years ago. But this time, something was different. This time, she wasn't alone. General Cross, said General Reeves, I think you're forgetting something important, which is, Captain Hale's actions were recorded by multiple base sensors, radar systems, and aircraft cameras. We have complete documentation of the engagement, including enemy aircraft positions, weapons launches, and tactical decisions. Would you like to review that footage before making accusations about her performance? Cross hesitated, apparently not expecting the level of documentation available. Furthermore, Reeves continued, the preliminary investigation shows that the attacking aircraft were using military-grade weapons and electronic warfare systems. This wasn't a random terrorist attack. It was a coordinated assault by professionally trained pilots using advanced equipment. Captain Hale didn't just save the base. She may have prevented a significant intelligence breach. Harrison stepped forward. General Cross, I'm going to make this simple. Captain Hale is under my command, operating in my theater, defending my base. Her actions were authorized, appropriate, and successful. If you want to file complaints about her performance, you're welcome to do so. But she's staying on flight status, and she's remaining as commander of the Ghost Hawk program. Cross looked around at the 3 generals facing her, clearly realizing she was outnumbered. This isn't over, she said finally. There will be an investigation, and there will be consequences. As she turned to leave, Mara called out, "General Cross." Cross stopped, looking back with obvious irritation. 8 years ago, I let people like you destroy my career because I was tired of fighting political battles. I won't make that mistake again. Mara's voice was calm but carried an edge of steel. If you want to come after me, bring everything you have, because I'm not hiding anymore. The confrontation was over, but Mara knew it was just the beginning. The bureaucratic machinery was in motion, and there would be investigations, hearings, and political maneuvering. But for the first time in 8 years, she was ready for the fight. As Cross's sedan disappeared down the flight line, Harrison clapped Mara on the shoulder. "Welcome back to the real Air Force, Captain. Hope you're ready for what comes next." Mara looked up at the morning sky, where a formation of fighters was practicing maneuvers against the blue horizon. "General, I've been ready for 8 years. I just didn't know it yet." 6 months later, Captain Mara Hale stood in the briefing room at Edwards Air Force Base, addressing a room full of test pilots, engineers, and senior officers. The Ghost Hawk program had been moved to Edwards after the attack on Whitmore, and Mara had been promoted to major and given command of the entire experimental squadron. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, clicking to the next slide in her presentation, "the Ghost Hawk has exceeded all performance expectations in operational testing. We've completed over 200 test flights with 0 mechanical failures and perfect mission success rates. The aircraft is ready for full-scale production." General Harrison, now her direct superior at Edwards, nodded approvingly from the front row. Beside him sat General Reeves and several other senior officers who'd supported Mara through the political storm that followed the Whitmore incident. The investigation into General Cross's accusations had lasted 4 months and concluded with complete vindication of Mara's actions. The attacking aircraft had indeed been traced to a foreign intelligence operation designed to test American defensive capabilities and capture the Ghost Hawk technology. Mara's decisive response had not only saved the base, but prevented a significant intelligence breach. Cross herself had been quietly reassigned to a desk job in Washington after it was discovered that her opposition to Mara was based on incomplete information and political pressure from defense contractors who viewed the Ghost Hawk as a threat to their existing programs. "The tactical innovations developed during this program will revolutionize air combat doctrine," Mara continued. "The Ghost Hawk's integration of stealth technology, advanced avionics, and neural interface systems creates capabilities that no existing fighter can match." In the audience, she spotted several familiar faces. Janet Rodriguez had transferred to Edwards as well, now serving as Mara's deputy program manager. Her administrative skills and understanding of Mara's background made her invaluable in managing the complex logistics of experimental aircraft testing. Chief Morrison had also requested transfer to the program, bringing his expertise in maintaining cutting-edge systems. His respect for Mara's abilities had only grown as he watched her handle both the technical challenges of test flying and the political pressures of program management. "The program has also validated new training methodologies," Mara said, advancing to the final slides. "We've proven that experienced combat pilots can rapidly adapt to revolutionary aircraft designs when proper training protocols are followed. The neural interface technology, once considered too complex for operational use, has become intuitive for pilots with the right background." After the briefing, Mara walked outside to the Edwards flight line, where a new production model Ghost Hawk sat gleaming in the California sun. The aircraft looked identical to the prototype she'd flown at Whitmore, but she knew it incorporated dozens of improvements developed during the testing program. "Impressive presentation," said a voice behind her. Mara turned to see a young lieutenant approaching, Lisa Chun, one of the newest test pilots assigned to the program. Thank you, Lieutenant. How are you adapting to the Ghost Hawk systems? It's incredible, ma'am. The neural interface feels like the aircraft is reading my mind. I've never experienced anything like it. Chun was part of the new generation of pilots being trained on the Ghost Hawk, younger officers who would take the program into full operational status. Watching them learn and grow reminded Mara why she'd fought to return to flight status. Ma'am, Chun continued, can I ask you something personal? Mara nodded. The other pilots talk about what happened at Whitmore, about how you were hiding in logistics for 8 years. Why did you do that? Why give up flying when you were so good at it? It was a question Mara had been asked many times over the past 6 months, and her answer had evolved as she'd come to understand her own motivations better. Because sometimes, Lieutenant, we make choices based on fear instead of courage. I was afraid of making mistakes, afraid of political consequences, afraid of being responsible for other people's lives. Mara looked up at the sky, where contrails marked the passage of other test aircraft. But fear is a poor foundation for a career. Eventually, circumstances force you to remember who you really are. And who are you really, ma'am? Mara smiled, remembering a similar conversation with Janet months ago. I'm a pilot, Lieutenant. Everything else is just details. That evening, Mara sat in her quarters writing her weekly report to Air Force headquarters. The Ghost Hawk program was ahead of schedule and under budget, with the first operational squadron expected to achieve initial operating capability within 18 months. Her personal evaluation ratings were the highest she'd received in her entire career. But the real measure of success wasn't in efficiency reports or performance metrics. It was in the knowledge that she was exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she was meant to do. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. The caller ID showed Janet's number. Major Hale, she answered. Very formal, Janet laughed. I just wanted to let you know that the final production contracts were signed today. Congratulations, the Ghost Hawk is officially entering operational service. It's been a team effort. None of this would have been possible without the support of everyone involved, including a certain logistics officer who turned out to be a legendary pilot. Mara laughed. Especially her. She taught me that sometimes the best place to hide is in plain sight, but eventually you have to stop hiding and start living. After hanging up, Mara walked outside to watch the sunset over the Mojave Desert. In the distance, she could see aircraft practicing night operations, their navigation lights tracing patterns against the darkening sky. 8 years ago, she'd thought her flying career was over, destroyed by politics and bureaucracy. She'd hidden herself in administrative work, convinced that anonymity was safer than recognition, that paperwork was preferable to cockpits. But life had a way of revealing truth, even when you tried to bury it. The attack on Whitmore had forced her to choose between safety and duty, between hiding and fighting, between who she'd become and who she'd always been. She'd chosen to fight, and in doing so, had rediscovered not just her skills as a pilot, but her purpose as a leader. The Ghost Hawk program wasn't just about developing new aircraft. It was about proving that experience and expertise could overcome political obstacles. That courage was more important than caution, that sometimes the quiet ones had the most to offer. A formation of Ghost Hawks passed overhead, their engines barely audible thanks to advanced noise reduction technology. Mara watched them disappear into the night, carrying pilots toward training exercises that would prepare them for missions she might never know about. But that was the point, wasn't it? She'd done her part by developing the program, proving the aircraft, and training the next generation of pilots. They would carry on the mission while she moved on to whatever challenge came next. Her phone buzzed with a text message from General Harrison. New experimental program starting next month. Interested in commanding a squadron of stealth bombers? The challenge might appeal to you. Mara smiled and typed back, "Send me the technical specifications. If it flies, I can learn it." Some people were born to push papers. Others were born to push the boundaries of what was possible in 3 dimensions, to test the limits of technology and training, to stand between their country and those who would do it harm. Major Mara Hale, callsign Vapor, had finally remembered which category she belonged in. As she walked back toward the hangar, Mara allowed herself one last look at the Ghost Hawk prototype that had started it all. The aircraft that had given her back her identity, her purpose, and her future. 8 years of hiding were over. The warrior was home, and the sky was calling. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world. Authors. Note: this story is dedicated to all the quiet professionals who serve in shadows, waiting for the moment when their skills are needed most. Sometimes, the greatest heroes are the ones you never see coming.